Dari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Chanabala Girivardhari Gopi Chanabala Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Shri Radhe Jaya Radha Giri Hare Radha Giri Hare Shri Radhe Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Amrit Vipad Paramahansa Paripradikachaya Stottar Chatashi Shrimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki John Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajika Shashtottara Shatashi Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Sarasvati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Garantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gauda Premanand Ki. Start by reading from the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. The chapter is A Threat Against ISKCON, page 840. The second floor parlor, now the temple room, was filled with more than 150 disciples and guests, and they could see Prabhupada's form rise into view as he came up the stairs. He still carried his white attaché case in his left hand and his bead bag in his right. And although he had just come out of the winter's night, he wore no coat, only cotton robes and a sweater. He appeared radiant. Prabhupada approached the altar. He seemed to notice everything. The small Radha Krishna deities enthroned beneath a red velvet canopy, the larger deities of Jagannath, Subhadra, and Balarama on a raised shelf above the picture of Lord Chaitanya and his Sankirtana party. Even the brass arati paraphernalia brightly shining on the small table near the altar. Turning to his secretary and traveling companion, Purushottama, he asked, "What do you think, Purushottama? Isn't it very nice?" Crossing the room, Prabhupada sat on the red velvet Vyasasana. He spoke, and the audience was attentive. After praising the London Centre, the deity worship there, the expertly made puris for Radha and Krishna, he turned toward the altar and said, "If you clean the deity's utensils, your heart will become cleansed." By polishing the deity's paraphernalia, he said, the devotees were cleaning their spiritual master's heart also. As he spoke, focusing simply and purely on devotion to the deity, the devotees suddenly realized the importance of this aspect of their Krishna consciousness. "Who has made these clothes?" Prabhupada asked, glancing at Radha and Krishna's little flounced dresses. "Sharadiya," a few devotees called out. Prabhupada smiled. "Thank you very much." Then he threw back his head and laughed. "Is Sharadiya still fighting with her husband?" The devotees and guests laughed, while Sharadiya covered her face with her hands. "Don't fight with your husband," Prabhupada said. "He is a good boy. Anybody that comes to Krishna consciousness is good." He then asked to see the rest of the house. I'll finish there. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Today we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam 5th canto, chapter 8, a description of the character of Bharat Maharaj. Text 8. I'll just read the verse myself. It's in prose. Tasya hava ena kunaka ujair actually it's not. Tasmin krita nija bi mana syahar. Astat poshana palana lalana prinan nanu dya natma niyama. Sahayama purusha parichar yadaya. Ekaikasha katipaye nahar ganena. Viyujyamana kila sarva evo tabasan. Tasya hava ena kunaka uchair etasmin krita nija bimanasyahar. Ahastat poshana palana lalana pinana nudya nenatma niyamaha. Sahayama purusha paricharyadaya ekaikasha katipaya ganena. Viyuchyamana kila sarva evodabasan. I get his price. Last time. Tasya hava ena kunaka uchar etasmin krita nija bima nasyahar. Ahas tat poshana palana lalana pinanan nudya nenatmak niyama. Sahayama purusha paricharya daya ekaya kasha kati payena naharaganena. Yujamana kila sarva evo davasan. Word for word, tasya of the king, of that king. Hava indeed. Aina hunake in the deer calf. Uchair greatly. A tasman in this. Kritanija abhimanasya, who accepted the calf as his own son. Aha, every day. Tatporshana, maintaining that calf. Palana, protecting from dangers. Lalana, raising it or showing love to it by kissing it and so on. Rinana, petting it in love. Anudyanena, by such attachment. Atmaniyama, his personal activities for taking care of his body. Sahayama, with his spiritual duties such as non-violence, tolerance, and simplicity. Purusha Paricharya Adaya, worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead and performing other duties. Ekasha, every day. Katipayena, with only a few. Ahaganena, days of time. Yujamana, being given up. Kila, indeed. Sarve, all. Eva, certainly. Udabasan, became destroyed. Translation and purport by Divine Grace. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Gradually, Maharaj Padata became very affectionate toward the deer. He began to raise it and maintain it by giving it grass. He was always careful to protect it from the attacks of tigers and other animals. When it itched, he petted it, and in this way, he always tried to keep it in a comfortable condition. He sometimes kissed it out of love. Being attached to raising the deer, Maharaj Bharata forgot the rules and regulations for the advancement of spiritual life, and he gradually forgot to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. After a few days, he forgot everything about his spiritual advancement. From this, we can understand how we have to be very cautious in executing our spiritual duties by observing the rules and regulations and regularly chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. If we neglect doing this, we will eventually fall down. We must rise early in the morning, bathe, attend Mangalarti, worship the deities, chant the Hare Krishna mantra, study the Vedic literatures, and follow all the rules prescribed by the acharyas and the spiritual master. If we deviate from this process, we may fall down, even though we may be very highly advanced. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Yagya dana tapah karma natyajang karyam eva tat. Yagyo danang tapaschaiva pavanani manishinam. Acts of sacrifice, charity, and penance are not to be given up, but should be performed. Indeed, sacrifice, charity, and penance purify even the great soul. Even if one is in the renounced order, he should never give up the regulative principles. He should worship the deity and give his time and life to the service of Krishna. He should also continue following the rules and regulations of austerity and penance. These things cannot be given up. One should not think oneself very advanced simply because he has accepted the sannyas order. The activities of Bharat Maharaj should be carefully studied for one's spiritual advancement. Om Jnanatamrandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshura Militang Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. When we read this pastime, we feel that it instills a healthy fear in us. How is that? Well, we're reading here about Bharat Maharaj, who was known to be a very elevated personality. Yet due to inattention, he fell down from his position and became a deer in the next life. When we look at someone like Bharat Maharaj, who was the son of Rishabhadev, the incarnation of the personality of Godhead himself, and we see how that happened to him, we may think, who are we in comparison? How is it that we stand a chance against Maya? Well, one thing that we can hold on to that can give us a little bit of hope is the detail that I'm sure has been shared by many of the previous class givers. I know for sure it was shared on Sunday. And that Bharat Maharaj, he willingly misused his free will to set the example for us, to show us that it doesn't matter who we are, we should be careful in trying to hold on to the regulative principles, to practice the regulative principles of bhakti yoga. He did it willingly. He was an extraordinary example, one of many who act in a seemingly wrong manner in order to teach us how we should act properly. But another thing that we can hold on to that can give us some hope is the idea that by keeping to the regulative principles, we can actually be safe. In fact, our practice protects us, or more correctly put, our application of the practice protects us. Of course, we know that we're dependent on the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead ultimately, but we shouldn't downplay our own efforts in practicing bhakti. As well as the mercy being there, the endeavor of the living entity also needs to be there as well. We actually have to do our part in order to warrant getting the mercy. The classic analogy is given of the sparrow whose eggs were stolen by the ocean. The sparrow, in order to get her eggs back, she took on the impossible task of trying to take away one drop of seawater at a time with her beak in the hopes of emptying the ocean so that she could get her eggs back. Garuda, seeing this, he saw her and he had some empathy for her, some sympathy for her. So he decided, seeing her endeavor, seeing her efforts to try and empty the ocean, that he would try and help her himself. And in doing so, in trying to help her, the ocean became scared and gave the eggs back. So from that example, we see that while, yes, mercy is required in the ultimate end to get the result, we actually have to do our part as well. Again, our practice, it protects us. And what does it protect us from? It protects us from falling back into illusion. In the purport, we're reading the ideal level of engagement that a sadhaka should have. Prabhupada outlines what we should do if we want to stay safe. So he says, we must rise early in the morning, bathe, attend Mangalarti, worship the deities, chant the Hare Krishna mantra, study the Vedic literatures, and follow all the rules prescribed by the acharyas and the spiritual master. So right there, we have a clear outline of what the ideal is in Krishna consciousness, all the basic activities that we need to perform in order to stay protected. Now, at this point, an immediate qualm may arise or doubt, because not all of us are in a situation where we have the time to do these things. Not all of us are single and brahmachari or single and living in a woman's ashram. A lot of us are working. A lot of us are very busy with so many responsibilities that we need to perform to maintain ourselves. And that's fair. That's acknowledged. So rather than feel depressed or inadequate that we're not meeting the ideal, we should hold it in high regard and aspire for it. If we can't do it at this point in our lives, at least we can try and find things that we can do and hold on to that. And in the future, who knows, maybe we'll get a better situation and we'll be able to make it work. And another qualm that may come up or a doubt is that, it's difficult. It's difficult to try and follow and aspire for an ideal, such as what Prabhupada's giving. But the fact is, it may be difficult to follow, but what's more difficult is having to deal with the consequences of not following it.
हाँ कुछ जा रहे हैं
Not sure who that is, but in any case,
हाँ सर
maybe the host could mute them.
Yeah, muted, bro. It's muted. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So it's difficult to follow, but it's more difficult to have to deal with the tribulations that Maya will put us through. Another way of putting it is that it's actually easier. We find in life it's actually easier to take on difficulty willingly than have to experience difficulty unwillingly. For those of you who know him, SB Keshava Maharaj, he often shares the concept. He calls it the 5 a.m. club, joining the 5 a.m. club. The 5 a.m. club is just a club where the people who are part of it, they wake up early, they chant their rounds early. Unfortunately, for most temples, it's probably too late for Mangalarti, but it's a good standard to aspire for anyway. They do all their sadhana early so that it sets them up for the rest of the day. So he says, one should join the 5 a.m. club so that it prepares them, gives them a clear head, a higher vision, so that they can deal with the 9 a.m. reality. And in that way, they can avoid the 12 p.m. catastrophe. Another way of looking at it is, if we imagine the analogy that we as devotees are traveling on a boat, we're trying to traverse the ocean of miseries known as the material world back to Godhead. In the course of us trying to traverse the ocean, there may be so many different weather conditions. There may be winds, there may be rains, there may be storms, there may be thunder, and the waves may rock the boat. But someone who's adequately prepared for these weather conditions, despite the rocking of the boat, they themselves are not really affected. In fact, they understand that the rocking of the boat is just incidental, and they stay fixed on continuing to try and traverse the ocean to reach their goal. This is the clear-headedness, this is the privilege that keeping to a regulated practice gives us. Regardless of what goes on in our lives, simply by staying committed to our practice, it protects us. As Prabhupada often says, that ocean, the ocean of material existence and all its problems, its issues and miseries are reduced to the size of a calf's hoof print. So to restate the point, by correct application of our practice, we're protected. But second of all, another point that I wanted to share that I was thinking about when I read this verse was the idea of not just keeping to the minimum standard, whatever that may be for us, but also to try and push forward in devotional service with some sort of intensity. As it said, the best defense against the enemy is a good offense. So in the fight between the living entity and Maya, we have to understand she's always on the offense. We're never actually safe in any circumstance because our very existence is her kingdom, and which she has complete rule over. As it said, the effects of lust, they exist within the senses, they exist within the mind, they exist also in our intelligence. So all these different aspects of our being are places where Maya can actually attack. And she's intense. You can imagine an analogy. Just imagine if you're standing in one place and then someone is trying to push you. So there are three different outcomes depending on what you do in that situation. If you are weak, or if you allow them to just push you, you'll fall back. You'll go backwards. You'll fall on your back. If you push against them with equal force, you'll stay in one place. But you may not necessarily make any progress forward. But if you push with greater force than they are, if you actually push harder than they are, then you'll potentially move forward. And not only that, you may be able to push them over. So similarly, there are three ways that we can act within our devotional life and three potential outcomes. Number one, we can have a very casual approach to devotional service and not take our practice so seriously. And that's compared to that can result in Maya just pushing us over. Instead of making progress or even just staying in one place, we end up regressing. The second thing that we could potentially do is just keep a minimum standard of devotional service. Chant our 16 rounds, maybe do service whenever we feel like it, maybe read whenever we feel like it. And that could be, I guess, at best considered to or compared to pushing back with equal force. So you may not go backwards, but you may not also go forwards either. And the danger is always there of if you lapse in terms of your concentration, if you become a little bit relaxed, then you'll end up going backwards again. So the third thing that we can do, the ideal would be to push harder than Maya is pushing you. In other words, we need to become intense because Maya is intense. If we look at materialists as well, of course, they're governed by the modes. We can also be governed by the modes. So some of them might be situated such that they have the mentality that in order to achieve things in life, they have to work hard. They have to push themselves, ultimately. You can consider them to be in the mode of passion. Those who are more high achievers, they want to achieve more in their career. They're into self-development, stuff like this. These people are in the mode of passion. And self-development, self-improvement, and books by authors who are into that. It's fairly popular, amidst the mainstream public. A lot of people look up to that, see as a higher level of living, a higher quality of life if you are actually progressive materially. Whereas the mode of passion is actually not the highest of the modes when we look at it from the devotional, spiritual perspective. In any case, quite a few materialists are intense about their material life. There was a quote which I read which actually inspired me in one sense, in which it said, to work 40 hours a week is merely survival. More than that, so investing up to 90 hours a week, that's an investment in your future. So I was thinking about it in terms of our spiritual life. We can do the minimum, we can chant 16 rounds, but in one sense, especially if it's not as attentive as it could be, if it's spread throughout the day, then we could say that 16 rounds is merely just survival. To do more than that, to endeavor to be attentive, and then on top of that, endeavor to read Prabhupada's books, on top of that, endeavor to engage in service as much as possible, that's an investment in your future. Therefore, Prabhupada, to give us the best chance of investing in our future, he gives a whole program for engaging our mind and senses. Whether or not we take advantage of that depends on what we want in life. The thing is, for someone who wants something bad enough, and this applies materially as well, it doesn't matter what obstacles are placed in front of them. It doesn't matter how many challenges seem to be ahead of them. They'll exercise their intelligence as much as possible in order to reach the goal, regardless of all these other things that are going on. And in exercising their intelligence, problem solving, they'll be able to create a set of circumstances which ensures that they'll be successful. And that's the difference between someone who's generally successful in material life versus someone who just stays comfortable or ends up becoming a down and outer, so to speak. Is that the person who eventually becomes successful, he has the ability, the drive as well, to utilize his intelligence to find ways to overcome all the problems that he faces and reach the goal. So how can we situate ourselves in such a way that we achieve the goal? When I was first coming along in Krishna consciousness, my mentor in Wellington, he told me about the ideal situation, the ideal position that a devotee should be in. He told me there are 3 types of zones that a devotee could be in. And this is something that you will find in a lot of self-development books as well. He says the first zone is the comfort zone. The comfort zone is just where we, I guess you could say, fool ourselves to think that everything's okay, that we don't need to push any further. And we, out of fear, more or less, we just stick within the circle of what we deem as being easy. But for many people, materialists who are progressive, they judge this as being like death. There was one materialist, successful materialist who said that most people who work a 9 to 5, they're merely just surviving. And in fact, they're actually dead. They just haven't made it official yet. Obviously, sometimes these guys get a little bit over the top in what they say. But the point is, we don't want to be in the comfort zone because there's no progress. There's no room for moving forward. Now, the second zone that we could be in, we could go the complete opposite way and push too hard and enter into what's called the break zone. So in an attempt to try and feel like we're making progress, we may go over the top, we may overexert ourselves, reduce our sleep beyond what's necessary, eat too little, become too austere, take on too much so that we can't actually do any of the tasks that we take on properly. That's considered to be in the break zone. You put yourself in a position where you might actually see everything happening around you just fall apart. Burnout, in other words, that's the typical term most people use. You end up burning out. So again, this is not something that we want. The third zone is the ideal, and that's known as the stretch zone. It's a healthy balance between not being too comfortable and not exerting yourself too much. Taking on enough so that you feel challenged, but not overburdened. And the way that you can enter that zone is by asking yourself a few questions. Number one, from wherever I am now, how can I push myself from here? Number two, with what I'm doing now, how can I improve it? How can I improve my service? How can I improve what I'm doing so that it's more pleasurable for Krishna? And number three, looking at my day, looking at my schedule, how can I fill my day as much as possible so that there's no room for Maya to enter? So by asking yourselves these three things and then using the answers, trying to act on what you've come up with, then you can keep yourself in the stretch zone. Another quote from SB Kesha Maharaj, he puts it quite nicely. When it comes to intensity, he says, we have to discover an intensity that fits with our personality so we can maintain a consistency that develops our spirituality. Because the fact is, what's intense for someone may be not so intense for someone else. What's seemingly easy for someone may be too intense for someone else. So ultimately, we can't look at others and find out from them or look at them and think that by doing what they do, that'll put us in the stretch zone. We have to gain more self-awareness, seek guidance so that we can understand what is enough for us, enough to keep us in the stretch zone and keep us challenged, but not reaching the stage when we burn out. So these lessons, we draw these lessons from this particular verse in purport, from the example of Bharat Maharaj, who acted in such a way that it made it seem like due to attentiveness, he fell down. That was the case, actually, externally. Internally, we know is very different. And between when he met the deer to when he fell down, he said it only took a few days before he forgot everything about his spiritual advancement. So these things can happen quickly. Maya is strong. But to conclude, while being dependent on the mercy, if we do our part, then by following the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga as strictly as we can, we protect ourselves from Maya. Our practice will protect us. It's on us, no one else is going to make us do it. We have to be the ones to do it, to make it a point to follow the regulative principles strictly. And as it also states at the end of the purport, which is quite interesting, even in the advanced stages of our spiritual development, even if we become sannyasis, very advanced devotees, still this point of keeping to the regulative principles is very necessary. So one final thought that I had is that seeing the example of Bharat Maharaj again, we shouldn't feel depressed or fearful that because a great personality like him fell down, that we don't have a chance. The point here is that because he didn't follow the regulative principles, he fell down. But the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga, they're accessible for everybody. Whether you're a sannyasi, whether you're a new devotee, the regulative principles are there. The process is there for everyone to take to. So therefore, we have just as much opportunity to be protected as someone like Bharat Maharaj, because we have just as much opportunity to take to the regulative principles as he did. So we don't worry so much about our future, as long as we know that at the present, we're doing as much as we can. We're following the regulative principles, and as well as that, trying to challenge ourselves. We're doing as much as we can to move forward and to push against Maya, who is pushing back. It's actually quite simple. That's what I've found. It's simple, but as Prabhupada says, we can make it complicated. But it doesn't have to be. In any case, I'll finish there, and I'll ask if anybody has anything to share, any thoughts, comments, reflections.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam.
Dandavat Pranams, Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much for explaining that text so nicely and with various examples, especially that attracts the examples of casual approach, minimum approach, and maximum approach. That's really the example, as you mentioned, 40 hours of work. How does it affect along with the 70 hours of work? So this especially indicates that your try for minimum standard is for survival, but something you push above the 40 hour, that is an investment. So similarly, in our regular practice, as you mentioned, 16 rounds is an optional, is a minimum standard. But if you can follow this more rounds, or you can make more rounds in the day, making our efforts to read the Prabhupada books, listening the instruction from our spiritual master, and accepting various services, that is an investment. So every devotee has to try their best to make a balance in their material life and spiritual practices with this example, so that they can advance regularly. Not to stick at one point by giving their extraordinary services and extraneous effort to advance in the spiritual life is the subject matter of this text. We see Bharat Maharaj, such an advanced devotee, because of being attracted by the baby deer, he just forgot all about his duties, regular duties, and that cautions us that not to neglect our regular services towards devotional service need to be progress every day, no matter how materially we attached, but we need to balance it in such a way the progress in the spiritual life continues, and that will keep us healthy in the spiritual advancement. So this is a very good example for all of us practicing devotee. That's why Srila Prabhupada has given the route how to maintain. Waking up in the morning, take bath, attend Mangalarti, worship the deities, chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra, Vedic literature, and following the prescribed duty and the instruction of the spiritual. So these are the progressive attention of the devotee that helps us to progress every day in our spiritual life. So if we get still of doing these activities within our comfort zone, as you mentioned, then is likely to become still and in one position, and there are hardly any chance to progress in the spiritual advancement. So, as a cautions of this text, we should be very prepared and follow the instruction of our spiritual master and Srila Prabhupada's instructions so that our progress remains in an increasing order. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu, for analyzing that very nicely. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dhanvat Pranam, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for the wonderful class. Prabhuji, you gave so many nice examples there. And one of them was that we should be in the stretch zone, not the comfort zone. But I have two questions which are related simultaneously, related to one another. That when we increase our intensity in devotional service, doesn't Maya increase her intensity as well to push back more? Because the more intensity we increase in devotional service, we get from the stretch zone into the comfort zone. So suppose, somebody's chanting 32 rounds because I want to increase the intensity, right? But when they get to that point, that 32 round now becomes their comfort zone. Initially, it's their stretch zone, but then it becomes their comfort zone. And so then doesn't that make available an opportunity for Maya to attack? And then obviously from 32 rounds, the person might go to 64, but after a while, that becomes their comfort zone. So how to understand this, Prabhuji?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's definitely a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's true. Progressively, as we get stronger, I've noticed, not that I consider myself very strong in Krishna consciousness, but I've noticed over the years that the tests do get bigger. But the way that we deal with the topic of intensity is there's two ways that you can become more intense. One is through quantity, quantity meaning the amount of service or rounds or reading you do, and the other is through quality. So it's a given that there'll always be a competition between the living entity and Maya, and we may not be able to, if we look at intensity just in terms of quantity, we'll have to be chanting, an infinite number of rounds eventually in order to have any hope of battling her. But, practically speaking, we may not be able to chant that many rounds, but whatever we are doing, we can do with more quality.
Yeah.
We can chant more attentively and make that our aspiration every day. And I've noticed that, and at least trying to do that and trying to increase the quality of the service, there is a degree of protection. Maya is there, but she becomes a lot more quiet. The temptation, the thoughts she projects into your mind, they sort of become background noise. If you simply make an effort to increase the quality by becoming more attentive in your service, in your daily spiritual activities as well, there's actually no room for her to enter, even though she's all around you. So I guess essentially the point I would make is, because practically speaking, increasing the quantity may eventually become too much, we try to increase the quality. And you'll find that her power will start to subside.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank
Yeah.
you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Krishna, there doesn't seem to be any more comments in the class here. Thank you. पंचकल्पतरुश्च
सिन्धु
पतितानां
पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमः।
अनंत
कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। प्रिंस मनोबिराम प्रभु की जय।
प्रभुपाद की
जय।
प्रेमानंदे हरि
हरि हरि बोल।
Glories to Assembled
हरे
devotees.
कृष्णा।
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
हरे कृष्णा।
Thank you, Prabhu.